This is The Alpine Corpse, Episode 2 of the Belshaw case. The Col des Mosses is a historic mountain pass in western Switzerland, traversed since ancient times. Initially used as a mule track, the need for a proper road was recognized as early as 1832. The pass, which reaches an altitude of 1,430 meters above sea level, connects the city of Aigle in the Rhone Valley with Châteaudet and later Gstaad in the Bernese Oberland. The paved road is not only a key transport link, but also leading to an ideal spot for cross-country skiing near its top, which is why it remains open year-round. Approaching from Aigle, the road ascends through a mostly deserted landscape dotted with only a few farmhouses before reaching the village of Le Sepi after about 15 minutes. Just before the village, the road crosses the Pont de l'Arroin, a bridge with a lay-by situated just beyond it on the right-hand side. On March 28, 1979, just over 2 weeks before Belshaw received the 2 police investigators at his apartment, a crew of local workers was clearing the road of debris and rocks, which, with the arrival of spring, became loose by melting snow and posed a traffic hazard. As they reached the lay-by and began cleaning the area of litter, one of the workers noticed something unusual at the base of a tree, just about 7 meters down the steep ravine. At first glance, it appeared to be the carcass of an animal wrapped in plastic. But though not common, it was known that local farmers illegally disposed of dead livestock in this way. Unsure of what they had found, the workers contacted the police. Upon arrival, officers carefully descended the slope to investigate. The moment they reached the package, the horrifying truth became apparent. It was not an animal carcass, but the heavily decomposed remains of a naked human body. The head and limbs had been wrapped in dark grey garbage bags secured with twine. The canton of Vaud criminal police were immediately summoned and soon arrived at the scene. Their initial assessment suggested that the body had been thrown over the ledge, sliding down the steep incline until it was blocked by a tree. It seemed obvious that the disposal must have taken place at night or in complete darkness. Otherwise, the perpetrator would have noticed the for him unfortunate circumstances and made certain that the corpse disappeared entirely into the gorge and out of sight. Then, given how sparsely populated the area was, the likelihood of discovery by a human would have been very slim. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, stripped of all clothing and jewelry. It was evident that animals had fed on it, turning it into a gruesome sight. The throat, breasts and parts of the limbs had been entirely eaten away. The only parts that remained fully intact were the teeth and jaw. The remains were sent to Aigle for forensic examination, but little could be determined. Experts confirmed that the victim was a middle-aged woman with light greyish hair and a well-maintained set of teeth, 4 of which had gold crowns. However, the cause of death remained unknown, even after analysis by the coroner, a forensic expert, a toxicologist, and later a European specialist from Denmark. As a first step, the police reviewed all local reports of missing persons before expanding their search, first to a cantonal level, then nationwide. They examined and cross-checked over 200 cases, some dating back several years, but to no avail. For a time it seemed that whoever had gone to the effort of stripping the body of clothing, jewelry, and any form of identification had succeeded in erasing the victim's identity. The only part of the plan that had obviously gone wrong was the body's final resting place. Despite being wrapped in garbage bags to make it slide more easily on the snowy surface, it had come to an unattended stop against a single tree. The discovery of the corpse caused a sensation across the region and was widely covered by local media, especially in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. The case dominated front pages in bold headlines. Pamphlets were printed and posted at train stations and newspaper stands everywhere. It was nearly impossible to ignore. One person who seemed entirely unfazed by the discovery, though, was Cyril Belshaw, spending dull, sad days at his Jolly Lock apartment. These are his words and voice.
I was increasingly desperate. Spent quite a bit of time crying. As the days went on, it got worse and worse and worse and worse. As time went on, it became clearer that, wasn't clear, but it became more likely that Betty was not alive.
Apparently unaware of the discovery and the ongoing investigation, Cyril Belshaw continued living undisturbed in his rented apartment. That changed in April, when, as we have heard in episode 1, 2 inspectors knocked at his door and requested a brief talk, a recent photograph, and most interestingly, the dental records of his wife Betty. Shortly after the investigators had left, a slightly anxious Cyril called his daughter Diana in Vancouver, asking her to contact his dentist friend, Dr. Nishiguchi, to obtain Betty's dental records. Diana complied, and in early May, printed copies of Betty's dental charts arrived by mail at Cyril's residence in Crans-Montana. The following day, Cyril went to the police station, but when Inspector Reichen, being in charge of the case, was unavailable, he left the dental records along with a note. In it, he informed Reichen that he would be taking a short trip to Brittany, but would return to Crans-Montana later to settle his account for the rented flat and return the keys to the real estate agent, Mrs. Wüst, before leaving for good to Vancouver. While Cyril was in Brittany, the police examined the dental records and compared them with the teeth of the corpse they had found. The results were clear. They did not match. A week later, when Cyril returned to Crans-Montana, he chose not to contact Inspector Reichen and ask about the investigation progress, but handed back the apartment keys, then drove his Citroën SM via Paris to Rotterdam, where he had arranged for the car to be shipped back to Canada. He himself then boarded a flight from Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam to Vancouver. It was now May 1979, and there was still no trace of Betty. The following weeks in Vancouver passed uneventfully. Cyril Belshaw resumed his lectures at UBC and settled back into his home. Life finally seemed slowly to be returning to normal. But in Switzerland, the investigation took an unexpected turn. An unexplained suspicion, later described by the investigators themselves as a lucky guess or an investigator's intuition changed the course of the case. Inspector Wies and a colleague, for reasons they could not quite articulate, began to doubt the dental charts Cyril had provided. While they weren't a perfect match, there were striking similarities, particularly in the jaw's dimensions, the arrangement and number of teeth. The only major discrepancy was the dental work itself, which appeared entirely different. Additionally, the documents lacked the requested X-rays. Something felt off, though they couldn't quite explain what. On July 20th, the Swiss police sent a telex via Interpol to Canada, requesting new and more detailed dental records from his dentist. The request arrived on July 22nd at the University Detachment of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP for short, a small branch just outside of UBC campus. The following day, Constable Smith, who handled the request, rang Cyril Belshaw, asking for the name of his wife's dentist and informing him that the Swiss police required a new set of dental records, including an X-ray. Cyril gave Constable Smith the name, then hung up the phone. He took a deep breath, paused for a moment and walked to his study. Sitting at his desk, he immediately contacted his lawyer and informed him of the situation, admitting that he had supplied the Swiss authorities with a slightly altered copy earlier. Following his lawyer's advice, he then wrote the following statement, which he personally delivered to the RCMP the next day. I, Cyril Belshaw, wish to make the following statement in order to correct information which I supplied to the Swiss police authorities. The Swiss police authorities requested me to obtain my wife's dental records in connection with the search resulting from her disappearance in January. These did not reach me until later than anticipated, and in fact a few days before I had to leave in May for London and Paris, and ultimately Vancouver. When they arrived, I felt I couldn't face the psychological trauma of possibly identifying my wife without the presence of family and friends, to the delays in returning to my home and family after many months of hope that my wife might be found alive. On impulse, I altered the charts during the copying process before distributing them. While this has probably not had material consequences for the investigation, it is clear that it might have done so, and it is important for me to express my regrets for a foolish action and to clarify the matter for the authorities. I understand that the correct dental chart is now being forwarded by the RCMP. In other words, while still in Crans-Montana, Cyril had deliberately altered the dental charts before submitting them to the Swiss police. Using white correction fluid, he carefully painted over the black marks indicating gold fillings and added new ones with black ink. He then took the chart to a local copy shop, made copies, and left them at Inspector Reichen's office along with his note of absence. He explained his misleading action by saying that living alone and feeling abandoned without the support of family or friends, he simply could not or did not want to accept the possibility that Betty was truly dead. Here is Cyril's recollection, his words and voice.
It was a highly charged emotional thing. At the minute, almost without control. And, well, there it was done. I felt, totally irrationally, but there it is, I felt that I didn't want to see her dead. I just didn't want that.
Be that as it may, Cyril was smart enough to inform the police about his falsifications before they inevitably discovered the discrepancies themselves. However, this did not change the fact that his actions had a detrimental effect on how he was perceived in connection with Betty's disappearance. On the contrary, it would haunt him for years to come. The certainty that the body found by the road workers was indeed Betty's became undeniable when Swiss forensic experts compared the newly obtained dental charts and X-rays with the remains found and the falsified records. As a result, all other possible explanations, accident, natural death, suicide or anything else, were instantly dismissed in favor of the most obvious of conclusions, foul play. And not surprisingly, Cyril became suspect number one. On September 23rd, while delivering a lecture at UBC, Cyril received a phone call from the RCMP requesting his immediate presence at their office. When he arrived, he was met by Constable Smith, along with two strangers, who, though initially unfamiliar, would not remain strangers for long. Swiss police investigators Fischlin and Wies. The interrogation was difficult. The Swiss investigators had trouble accepting some legal differences explained to them by the RCMP officer regarding how questioning is handled in Canada compared to Switzerland. The meeting was further complicated by the fact that neither Swiss officer was fluent in English, making communication difficult. However, they wasted no time in delivering their news. Based on the newly supplied dental records, the body having been discovered at the mountain road was conclusively identified as that of Betty. There was no doubt. And the line of questioning left no doubt that for them Cyril at this point was already their prime suspect. They deliberately withheld details about where and how she had been found, instead expecting to hear such details from Cyril.
I was in tears. I was absolutely unknowing. I kept saying, "Tell me more. Tell me more. Tell me where. Tell me how." They refused point blank. And they accused me. They would say to me, "You know. So why are you asking us?"
They proceeded with an intense interrogation nonetheless, a course of questioning that even the investigating judge later deemed to have been borderline. Before they even told Cyril that the body they had found was that of his wife, they asked him in terms that were simply not acceptable, like, "Tell us, why did you kill your wife? We know it was you." At one point, Fischling produced a dark grey garbage bag and asked Cyril if it looked familiar to him. Cyril was visibly taken aback, and the RCMP representative present had a difficult time keeping the interrogation within the boundaries of Canadian law. Yet no matter how fiercely the Swiss officers pressed him, Cyril remained composed, calm, and in control. He never contradicted himself, never made a damaging admission, and never lost his countenance.
I kept saying, "Look, you're getting it wrong. I didn't say that." Or there was some ambiguity that was not, I thought, correct. Doesn't matter. I think they decided that right at the beginning that the husband is guilty until proven not guilty. That's the first line of inquiry. And once they got onto that, that was it, as far as they were concerned. They didn't go anywhere else.
At one point, Constable Smith asked Cyril if there was another woman in his life. Belshaw denied it, stating that he was a happily married man. What Cyril did not know at the time was that the entire interview was being recorded, something that was common practice and fully legal under Canadian law, as long as the person interviewed was informed about it. The tapes and transcripts were later sent to Switzerland. After nearly 2 hours of questioning, Cyril agreed to the investigators' request to have a look at some of Betty's jewelry at his home. Together they drove to his house. When they arrived, at least half a dozen policemen were already waiting. Within minutes, the original request to simply view Betty's jewelry escalated into a full-scale search of his property. Distressed by the sudden turn of events, Cyril decided to call his daughter Diana, then his lawyer Harry McLaughlin. He advised him to remain silent and to channel all further communication with either the Swiss police or the RCMP exclusively through him. Furthermore, he instructed Cyril to demand that the police leave the house immediately, as they for sure did not have a search warrant. Hanging up the phone, Cyril turned around and shouted, "Everybody out!" The police did not argue. They left as swiftly as they had entered. Cyril shut the door, sat down in his armchair, and broke down in tears. For the first time he had the time and space to fully process the bitter truth. Betty was dead. The following day, Inspectors Weiss and Fischlin requested another interview with Cyril, but by then he had already counselled with Harry McLaughlin again. McLaughlin informed them that any further questions would need to be submitted in writing. Reluctantly, the Swiss investigators complied, but when their list of questions turned out to be almost identical to those from the previous day, McLaughlin dismissed the request for another interview as pointless. Frustrated, Weiss and Fischlin abandoned their attempts to questioning Cyril any further. It became clear that they could expect no more cooperation from him. Instead of sightseeing, Weiss and Fischlin spent their remaining time in Vancouver pursuing alternative leads. They visited the body shop where Cyril's Citroën SM was being restored. Though the outcome of that visit remains uncertain, it must have been insignificant. More importantly, they began interviewing as many people as possible: students, neighbors, professors, doctors, and friends. Just about anyone with a connection to the Belshaws. As a result, a clear picture of Betty and Cyril's professional and private lives emerged. Regarding Betty, the consensus was that she was a narrow-minded, stubborn, and devoted wife. However, in the weeks leading up to their departure for Europe, she had appeared completely overworked and on the verge of a nervous breakdown. There were suggestions that she may have been taking tranquilizer or sleeping pills, though this was never confirmed. Many believed that taking a sabbatical had been a wise decision. The assessment of Cyril, however, was quite different. Weiss and Fischlin had already gathered evidence in Switzerland indicating that Cyril had a way with women, something reinforced by their interviews in Vancouver. Their most surprising discovery in that regard came from Crans-Montana, where multiple sources confirmed that Cyril had frequently been seen with a young blonde woman. Mrs. Wüst, the real estate agent, was but one of the people who had noticed her. Sammy Friedman, a friend of Cyril's who had tea with Cyril and his daughter, another. Both described the woman as likely being Canadian or American, certainly not European. To Weiss and Fischlin, this revelation cast a doubt on the idea that the Belshaws had been a perfect couple. Subsequently, when in Vancouver, they focused on their inquiries on identifying this mysterious woman. They were determined to find her. And indeed they did. And what is worse, they did so in the most devastating effect for Cyril Belshaw. And here is why. Shortly before leaving Vancouver, Wies and Fischlin received a report from the RCMP about an incident that had taken place 6 months after Betty's disappearance, once Cyril had returned to Vancouver. According to that report of July 19, 1979, Constable Fleet was conducting a routine patrol on the UBC campus when he noticed a suspicious-looking red sports car parked in the secluded cul-de-sac. When he approached, he saw a man climbing off a woman. The man's clothes were disarranged, the woman's skirt undone and her underwear visible. When Constable Fleet asked for identification, the woman, who was in the driver's seat, and the owner of the car was unable to present her driver's license nor an ID. But after the male passenger did, Fleet was assured that everything was fine. Before leaving, he sarcastically remarked, "Why don't you do this somewhere else?" Nevertheless, he noted the incident in his police log. The man in the red sports car was, of course, Professor Cyril Belshaw. The woman a certain Mrs. Harris, one of his students. An attractive blonde in her early 40s, she lived close to the Belshaw residence with her husband and 2 children. She had met Cyril 25 years ago when he was a young professor and she a student at the nursery. They had both worked on the Canadian University Service Overseas program and had quickly become friends. Mrs. Harris later married and moved away, but after returning to Vancouver to continue her studies at UBC, she reconnected with Cyril and often counseled him regarding her academic career. The RCMP provided Mrs. Harris' address to the Swiss investigators, but before questioning her, Fischlin and Wies wanted to make perfectly sure that she was indeed the woman seen with Cyril in Crans-Montana prior to Betty's presence. Back in Switzerland, the investigators were soon to confirm this. However, it wasn't Fischlin and Wies, but 2 RCMP officers that set out to question Mrs. Harris. The reason probably being that at the time they did not wish to immediately give away all their knowledge, but in a first move concentrate on the report regarding the incident in the car. They had already started questioning Mrs. Harris when surprisingly her husband arrived. Not wanting to put her in an awkward position, the officers politely and swiftly ended the interview after Mrs. Harris promised to call them the next day. But that call never came. When the RCMP followed up, Mrs. Harris informed them that her lawyer had advised her not to speak to them. Wies and Fischlin were not surprised. Cyril, being confronted with Constable Fleet's report, never denied anything. He later even admitted it having been a mistake. Yet he assured the police that their meeting, however dubious the location and circumstances, had been of a strictly professional nature.
It was a total error. She had asked me to meet with her to talk about an exam she just finished. We were parked right beside a nuclear facility. That nuclear facility had bright arc lights. And hanky-panky would have been pretty difficult.
Asked if Betty knew about this affair with his student, Cyril explained,
It had happened once before. We had tears. We spoke harshly. And we came together.
That Cyril had become the prime suspect was hardly surprising. Too many things hinted in his direction. The body having been found just 100 kilometers from Crans-Montana, not too far from the main route to Paris. The falsification of the dental records. Him obviously having had an affair. It did not look good, but still it was not enough to charge him. There was no motive and no murder weapon. It was becoming clear that an investigation on Canadian soil would lead nowhere. The Swiss police could no longer count on the support of the RCMP. Cyril Belshaw had in the meantime hired a lawyer and was refusing to further cooperate in any way. This naturally heightened suspicions. After all, if Cyril were innocent, wouldn't he do everything possible to assist in solving the crime? The Swiss authorities concluded that their only option was to seek his extradition. But firstly, they had to gather more evidence. Having returned to Switzerland, the investigators continued to scrutinize the evidence. They meticulously constructed Cyril's movements in the days before Betty's disappearance, tracking the provenance of garbage bags and twine, revisiting the Jolilac apartment, questioning neighbors and acquaintances, and re-examining the evidence they had. And they did indeed gather a few interesting details. A new forensic analysis of Betty's teeth revealed a slight pinkish coloration of the roots, a sign that, according to experts, occurs as a result of strangulation. And strangely, when investigators traced the couple's supposed route from Crans-Montana to Paris, not a single witness remembered having seen Betty, neither in the motel near Beaune, nor the Novotel Bagnolet in Paris, or the Bibliothèque Nationale. And even more suspiciously, not a single credit card receipt could be secured to support Cyril's version of events. Understandably, the paramount question hung over the Belshaw case like a dark cloud. Had Betty ever been to Paris? Despite the Swiss investigators' patience and relentless inquiries, the question remained unanswered, and the cloud of uncertainty refused to dissipate. The press in Switzerland and Canada quickly picked up on the details, and the case gained public momentum overnight. What began as the discovery of a dead woman evolved into a sensational scandal, a premiere featuring a renowned professor, his glamorous lifestyle, a secret love affair and falsified evidence. It had all the makings of a cause célèbre. To top it off, Swiss newspapers then added even more fuel to the fire. It published the testimony of a Yugoslav concierge from the Jolilac apartment who claimed to have seen Betty in Crans-Montana after Cyril had reported her missing. He even spoke to her sometime between January 20th and February 6th, and was quite certain of what he had seen. He specifically recalled her carrying a red purse. When the story reached the Vancouver press, friends of Betty were stunned. Betty carrying a red purse? Never ever. Impossible. Her friends dismissed the story outright, convinced the concierge had fabricated it or mixed up dates. Though his account was soon discredited, it successfully intensified the sensationalism surrounding the Belshaw case. Unmoved by media attention and public speculation, the Swiss investigators stayed focused on their work. And even though there was no formal extradition treaty between Canada and Switzerland at the time, they continued building their case. And before long they had gathered a significant amount of circumstantial evidence. Cyril's attempt to hide Betty's body, his falsification of Betty's dental records, his secret affair with Mrs. Harris, and his refusal to cooperate with Swiss authorities. The investigators believed these 4 points alone were enough to justify Cyril Belshaw's extradition to Switzerland for thorough questioning. However, in the end, Canada refused the extradition request, citing insufficient evidence. The Swiss authorities were frustrated, but there was little they could do. Still, they were not prepared to give up. If the process required patience, they were willing to wait. Meanwhile, in Vancouver, a memorial ceremony was held at UBC in honor of Betty Belshaw on October 3rd. Cyril, Adrian, Diana, and over 200 others attended as students from the English Literature Department recited poems by Milton and Hood. However, the mood was strange. Most notably, it was Cyril's demeanor that left many uncomfortable. Despite shedding some tears, his apparent indifference during the ceremony became a topic of discussion among those who attended once the service ended. But life had to continue. An important UNESCO conference in Paris that required Cyril's presence was approaching. While Cyril was determined to attend, he was also aware that the Swiss authorities were eager to question him. He suspected that there might be some kind of agreement between the Swiss and the French, but at the same time he was reluctant to let them dictate his movements and disrupt his professional commitments. It was a tough decision, but in the end he decided to proceed with his trip to Paris. And his suspicions proved correct. On November 7th, Roland Châtelain, the Swiss investigating judge, issued an arrest warrant. Just 4 days later, on November 11th, when Cyril's Air Canada flight AC 870 arrived at Paris-Roissy, an immigration officer led him to a separate room. Within the hour the police appeared and he was arrested. When he inquired about the reason, he was told that an Interpol warrant had been executed on behalf of Switzerland. A copy was presented. Its recent date and the swift and questioning arrest made Cyril suspect that someone had tipped them off about his arrival. He later found out he was right. None other than Sammy Friedman from the International Social Science Council, whom he had briefly over for tea in Crans-Montana, had alerted the authorities. The next day, Cyril was moved to the infamous Fleury-Mérogis prison to await his extradition hearing. Both the Canadian consul and Cyril's lawyer in Vancouver, Harry McLaughlin, were informed, who instantly put his contacts to work. Luckily for Belshaw, Jean-Félix Bachou, a highly respected Swiss lawyer who managed Graham Greene's and Charlie Chaplin's legal affairs, was in Paris on business at the time. After being briefed by McLaughlin, Bachou visited Belshaw in prison the following day, and within half an hour he was convinced of Cyril's innocence. He agreed to take the case and convince Roland Badinter, one of France's most brilliant lawyers at the time, to challenge the arrest and pending extradition to Switzerland of his client. When the Swiss authorities learned that none other than the renowned Roland Badinter had taken on Cyril Belshaw's case, their initial excitement over his arrest quickly faded. The impact was so overwhelming that they even began to fear his extradition might never happen. Stay tuned to find out what happened next in Fight for Justice, Episode 3 of the Belshaw case, another mysterious and puzzling criminal case as part of the Swiss Murder Mysteries podcast. Research written and narrated by me, Rudolph Isler. available on Apple Podcast or any platform of your preference. Please check out the show notes and visit our website at swissmurdermysteries.com to get familiar with the geographical details of the region and for additional information, including maps and photographs, as well as details on how to support the creator of this podcast.